Hey guys, and welcome back to my CCNA 200-301 course. Patrice is here, and in this video we are going to review NAT concepts. Are you ready? Let's get started. NAT stands for Network Address Translation, and it normally happens at the edge routers where your network connects to the outside world, namely internet. NAT simply means that swapping the source or destination IP address of an IP packet depends on the requirements. And in the first case, we call it source NAT, and in the second case, we call it destination NAT. In CCNA 200-301 course, the main focus is on source NAT, and we are not dealing with destination NAT stuff. So from now on, whatever I'm talking about, I mainly talk about source NAT. Let's assume that one of your users whose computer's IP address is 192.168.1.1 sends a traffic destined to internet to your edge router. In NAT terminology, on the left side of our router, I mean the internal side, our internal network is called inside. So one user with a private IP address 192.168.1.1 sends a traffic destined to a public server like Google DNS server, and the router now has to translate the source IP address because that private IP address is not routable via internet routers. So it has to change the source address and change it to a public IP address. Based on the public IP addresses you purchased from your service provider, you configure this NAT and says to the router, hey router, if 192.168.1.1 came from inside and wants to go outside, then change the source address from 192.168.1.1 to 52.67.91.223. And when the traffic comes back, do this all the way around. And in this way, our computer would be able to access external resources, although it has a private IP address. This type of NAT is called static NAT because you statically NAT one IP address, one private IP address to a public IP address. As I mentioned before, this is the main use case of NAT, but it doesn't mean it is only restricted from private to public. You can do it from private to private addresses as well. But since it is more in use, we normally, when we discuss about the NAT, we talk about private to public address translation. And in a static NAT, you have to have one-to-one correlation. So if you have other users, you have to purchase another public IP address and NAT another address to another public IP address. So there has to be a one-on-one or one-to-one correlation between your source IP addresses and public IP addresses. Routers keep record of these NATs in a table that is called NAT table. So whenever a traffic goes out, when it comes back, the router checks the NAT table and knows where this has been NATed to be able to redirect the traffic to the right host. Another type of NAT is called dynamic NAT. In dynamic NAT, we configure an address pool of our public IP addresses we purchased from our service provider. And on the other side, on the inside side, we have a range of private IP addresses as well. And then when we configure dynamic NAT, we correlate private IP addresses to that pool we defined, and then leave the decision who will be NATed to what to the router. So this is the router who determines which IP address will be NAT to what public IP address. Please bear in mind that in dynamic NAT also the correlation is one-to-one. So you have to have a one-to-one correlation between your private IP addresses and public IP addresses. I mean, if you have 16 users, you have to purchase 16 public IP addresses if you want them all to be able to access internet concurrently. Otherwise, they won't be able to do that. Because, for example, if you have 16 users inside and you purchase only 8 public IP addresses, and if the first 8 users connect to the internet, and if the 9th user comes in, then there is no any available address in the address pool, so the router can NAT that IP address and sends it outside. So the 9th user won't be able to access internet. Having equivalent number of private IP addresses and public IP addresses is not viable in many circumstances. And also we don't have that much available public IP addresses. So there should be another way so we can save our public IP addresses. And that solution is called PAT, or Port Address Translation, or sometimes it is called NAT overload. In Port Address Translation, we can NAT a number of users, multiple users at the same time, to one public IP address. How we can actually make sure that when we send a traffic destined to an outside world, and this will be happening for multiple users at the same time, how we can make sure the return traffic will be redirected to the right host when we have multiple hosts, multiple private IP addresses that are getting NATed to one single public IP address. Here is when we add port, TCP or UDP port to the picture as well. So let's assume that one computer with the source IP address of 192.168.1.1 sends a DNS request or DNS query to Google 8.8.8.8, and the source UDP port is 1078 and the destination port is 53. When we configure port address translation or PAT on our router, this packet will be translated to something like this. Source IP address will be translated to the public IP address we configured, which is normally the interface, the router's interface IP address. The destination will remain untouched. And then we change the source port as well and change it to something that is available. And the destination port also will remain the same. So with the combination of IP address and port, we create a kind of unique translation. So no other situation or no other devices will have similar situation. If you send it from another IP address, for example, from 192.168 to 1.2, destined to 8.8.8 with the same destination port and even from the same source port, this will be changed to something that will be unique for the other one. So when the traffic returns from outside, then router knows who made this a request and then will be redirected the traffic to the right host. Before wrapping up today's video, we have to review some NAT terminology, which are normally a bit of confusing. First of all, based on the previous slides, you became familiar with inside and outside. Inside means something inside your organization or your enterprise. And outside means something that is going outside of your network, namely internet. And the other two terms are local and global. Local, and it depends on the perspective of your view or your point of view, where you're looking at the things. Local means you have this locally in your network, and global means this is something globally viewable and people can see it globally. So for source NAT, inside local is your private IP address 192.168.1.1, and inside global is the representation of your private address, for example 52.67.91.209. Outside global is a resource that is outside of your enterprise and it is somewhere else in global internet, and that is something that you want to access it. And it is, for example, 8.8.8.8. Outside local does not applicable for source NAT, and it is mainly applicable when you're using destination NAT. When we run the verification commands, you can see that for source NAT, the outside global and outside local gonna be the same. Alright guys, this was our today's video. This video and the next one will be covering 4.1 exam topic, configure and verify inside source NAT using static and pools. And in the next video, we'll be doing the configuration part. I wish you enjoyed today's video and see you in the next one.